guys, right, we're going to have a look at how I've done my Grimdark Cawdor gang. Starting off with a black primer, Molotov's All for One graffiti paint. It's what I've used on quite a few things and I'm really liking this product as a primer. So next we're going to go in with Vallejo Metal Colour Silver, and I'm just going to spray this onto any area that I want to be metal. I'm taking the crown off the end because it gives you a tighter spray pattern, as you can see here. A bit more control. Just want to note that you're obviously going to get a bit of overspray at this point, but it doesn't matter because that'll be dealt with in the next stage when we come to do the grey and the white Zenithal highlight onto the black undercoat. Okay, so now we're going to go in with the first Zenithal highlight with Liquitex Neutral Grey. You can do this just with white if you're trying to save time, but for the sake of having to speed through a few models, I just find it's much easier just to have a go-to grey that I don't have to keep paying attention to how much pressure I'm putting on the trigger and so forth. It's just a bit, I find it's a bit more forgiving. So now we're going to use Liquitex Titanium White, and this will just be for the 12 o'clock, as it were, Zenith highlight. While this has been applied with an airbrush, there is no reason this couldn't be done with dry brush. I just find it's a bit quicker for me to do with an airbrush, and I like the smoothness that you get from it. However, the scratchy quality would add an extra element of texture, visual texture to the model, so absolutely no reason not to use it. And this is our end result, and this is what they look like. As you can see, some of the silver, especially on the base, has had white go on it, which is not desirable, but this is going to be a lot easier to clean up in a moment, as we can see here. Same silver we used on the base, Vallejo Metal Colour Silver. And just go over those parts that have had some of the white. Brings that shine back to them. It's not strictly necessary, I don't suppose, but you will get a better effect, I believe, if you go back and do this. So we're just going to come in now with a bit of Vallejo's Model Colour Ivory. This is just so the underpainting is a bit brighter for when we put the contrast or the inks, as you'll see in the next step, over the top. It makes them a bit more vibrant so that when we come to dull them down afterwards with the streaking grime, we'll have that bright underpainting. Now comes the time when we're going to put a bit of colour on the model. So we've done the underpainting, which technically is Ungracell, and I've used a few different inks. These are olive green, transparent raw umber, and the next one is transparent raw sienna. Now I've mixed these along with contrast medium, as it just gives a bit more body. The inks act a lot more like the pre-mixed contrast paints when you do this, and it means you can mix your own colours. I've also used Skeleton Horde for a bone coloured cloth. again, the exact inks don't exactly matter in this part, as long as they're earthy brown, reddish brown, greenish brown tones, it'll absolutely be fine. As you'll see next, I'm going to be adding Blood Angel's contrast, and that red with these neutral tones will contrast incredibly well, make the red really pop out. So here we can see that Blood Angel's contrast paint. No need to rush it, just take your time and apply it to those areas you want to have a bit of pop to them. Now, if you get any on the bits you've already painted or anywhere that you don't want, just have a spare brush on hand next to your water so that you can just use it as a bit of an eraser. So I'm just going back now with a bit of the raw burnt umber mixed with the contrast, same as we used before, and I'm just going to go over some of the areas I think are a little too pale. It's all personal preference, but it's just something I wanted to go for. I'm also putting a layer of this paint onto anywhere that is rope as well. I've mixed it a little thick, a little more ink to contrast ratio than I did in the previous step, so it will really pop on the ropes and what's already been painted. I'm just going to go in now and do the flesh in Gulliman's Flesh. Again, you could use any flesh tone you want, but this was my go-to. So now I'm just going to add Drakenhof Nightshade onto any area that I'm eventually going to paint black with the contrast black Templar paint. This is the old formula, by the way, and I do believe they have or are just about to bring out a new formula for this paint, making it act a bit more like a contrast. So I'm going to come in now with black Templar contrast paint along with contrast medium, and this is just to thin the black out. You can always add more layers if you need a bit more of a punchier black or it needs to cover more, but it's a lot harder to take it away afterwards. So now I'm just going to apply the black Templar to the hair, but I'm doing this neat, I'm not using any contrast medium. That is because I want a strong coverage. So I'm just going to come back in with the transparent raw umber mixed with contrast medium, and I'm just going to go over the hair that I've done just to give it a bit more vibrancy. I think it looks a bit better than just flat black. And after that we'll be coming in with a satin varnish over the entire model. This is just to protect the paint from the reductive technique that we're going to be using with the enamels. Also just going to touch up a few bits of silver like the studs and whatnot at this point. I'll then be adding the copper, and this is a mix of metal colour copper and Green Stuff World's copper pigment powder. If you haven't tried their pigment powders mixed into your metallics, I highly recommend it. They are incredibly shiny. And now we're on to the enamels, Streaking Grime, this one by AK. You can also get one from MIG. So this is going to be applied to the entire base. As you might have noticed, there has been a bit applied beforehand. This I think was the 5th model out the entire warband, and I had to re-top up the airbrush. So you just add this in thin layers to the entire model. And you could add it and then not have to bother taking it away after, but I think you get a better effect just applying it all over. Now it will mute everything out, it will make everything look a different shade of brown. Don't worry, that is exactly what it's meant to do. So now we're going to come in with some white spirits or mineral spirits and a Q-tip or cotton bud. And I'm just going to soak a bit in, and then I just dab it on just to get the enamels to reactivate. And every time you dab it on, a bit of the enamel will come off. Now I decided in a moment just to use a rolling technique on there, and I find that gives a really random awesome pattern. Now if you scrub too hard it will take it completely off, so just bear that in mind. Now if there's any hard to reach places, you don't just have to use a Q-tip, you can quite happily, as I'm doing here, just dip your paintbrush into a bit of the mineral spirits and just remove as needed. Now I'm going to come in with another enamel product. This is from MIG and it is dark green, so a dark wash for green vehicles. I'm just going to add this to a few places that I want the contrast, that is in values between light and dark, a bit more punchy, especially on this model in the gap in between the neck and the collar. Don't need to go too much into this, you've already got a lot of contrast from the previous enamel step. Before and after, still glossy from the mineral spirits. But for a first go with the enamels, I'm pretty happy. Now onto the oil paints. I've got cadmium yellow pale hue from Winsor and Newton. I'm going to be mixing that with the red that's also on there, which is a cadmium red. You'll see that in a second. This is 502's Abteilung's turquoise lights. These are really good. These are oil paints that are designed for miniature painting. It's the first time using one, and I must say I'm quite impressed. The pigment is really nice. And this is the cadmium red hue, again from Winsor and Newton. That I'm going to mix up an orange to make a rust colour, as we can see here. And I'll just apply that to a few different places, mainly on the base, just to get a bit of bright colours in there. So now I'm going to add that turquoise. I'm just going to add this to some of the copper areas, maybe to some of the carapace armour as well. And this is just to add yet another bright tone in there, and when it goes on like this you can see that would be a bit punchy, but if you find that it's a bit much, you just dip your brush into a bit of mineral spirits and lightly dab on, and just like the enamels it will thin it out and spread over the model. Word of caution I found when using this is the white spirits seem to reactivate the enamels. Even this was a day after doing the enamel stage and it still reactivated areas, so might want to take that into account, potentially putting a layer of varnish on over the top, but that's up to yourselves. So with that stage done, we're on to painting some of the smaller details like the candles. Now I'm going to use three colours. I'm going to use the model colour Ivory from Vallejo, and I'm going to use two Chimera colours. This one is Warm Yellow, and the next one is simply named Orange. So the idea for this is to paint the glow of the candle light onto the rim of the candle, and that'll leave a dark little recess in between the flame and the outer edge of the candle. From that we're then going to paint the flame an ivory, as we can see we're doing here, and then the majority of that will then be painted the yellow, and hopefully that will give a nice flame effect, especially from say across the table. So, as we can see, I think that's quite a successful, very quick candle. You could go into it a bit more and do lighter top half and it'll look like the light's glowing through the candle, but just for a gaming piece I think that'll be perfectly fine. So on to one of the last pieces, and this is going to be using Chimera Colours Carbon Black. This colour is an amazingly matte, same as all the Chimera paints, very matte. But this is very matte black, perfect for doing the rims of bases. Look a little shiny now, but obviously that's because the paint's still wet. I won't just be using this on the rim of the base, I'll also be using it on the ends of the gun barrels. Now you could drill the ends of the barrels, but if not done perfectly right, I've found that it just doesn't look amazing, so I tend to steer away from it and just use a very matte black paint, and I think the end result is perfectly fine. If you're doing a competition piece, maybe you want to go to that length of drilling the barrels out, but that's not what I'm trying to achieve here. With the barrels done, that is pretty much it. Now you could go back and you could do hours and hours and hours more steps on to these miniatures, but I just don't think it's needed. This is the end result. This is my first attempt at doing a Grimdark paint style, and I've learnt quite a lot. I absolutely love enamels for doing this work. The streak and grime is fantastic. So I'm going to call this a success. Nice, simple, should be easy for people to follow. If you don't have an airbrush, you can always dry brush the layers that are airbrushed on, and then the streak and grime can happily be applied with a paintbrush. It shouldn't make too much of a difference. Anyway guys, if you want to see some still pictures of these models, head over to the Instagram. Link will be in the description. That's all for now. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, like, comment and subscribe. Also be sure to check out our Facebook page at Wolfing Studios, the link's in the description. As always, thanks for stopping by, catch you next time.